Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to our National Hot Rod podcast. We're looking at National Hot Rods, past, present, and future. And we've been looking at drivers, past and present, over the last few weeks. We thought that this week we'd have a look on the other side of the fence. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to introduce Gary Staines. Hi, Gary. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, Brian. Good to be back, and really looking forward to getting a different take on our racing and another fellow fan, but also someone else that's worked within oval racing and much more beyond.
Absolutely. One of the personalities of our sport, I would say. You may recognize his voice. You might not recognize his face, actually. Nowadays, he's involved in more in international racing, and you'll have heard him commentating on DTM, GT Masters, Formula 3. And lately, he's become the voice of Ferrari. And this last weekend was on Sky Sports commentating on the Finale Mondiale Ferrari Challenge from, not Mugello. I've forgotten where it was from now. Misano, that'll be it. He's been involved, though, in oval racing for a number of years and was the man who was quite instrumental in getting National Hot Rod Racing onto our TV screens. It is, of course, Dave Richardson, and it's really good to welcome Dave here. So, hi, Dave. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure. Hello, Brian. Hello, Gary. I was somewhat flattered that I was invited until I heard your introduction. It was past, present, and actually we're even going further back in the past and bringing out a real old banger. And here I am. Hello.
Well, it's great to have you here, and someone who has been has woven himself into the history of National Hot Rods over the years. I'm guessing that during this crazy time at the moment, it must be pretty busy for you, and I'm guessing that COVID must have heavily impacted you over these last 12 months with what you do.
Yeah, enormously. But you know what? And I have to temper. Yeah, last year was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. I was flying back. I think the first time I realized just how serious this was going to be was I was flying back from Road Atlanta in the USA. I'd already been to Daytona, and I'd been to Road Atlanta in March. And as many will know, Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta is one of the busiest airports in the world. And I turned up for my flight, and it was like a ghost town, genuinely. There were so few flights operating, so few passengers, and I thought, this corona thing that we've heard about from the Far East is something really bad. I think for all of us, little did we know the impact that would have globally. And of course, domestically here in the UK, I mean, my wife will tell you every time I look at the news, every evening, look at the figures, I'm absolutely distraught. I mean, it's telephone number figures of people that have lost so much. And yeah, you know, we can be very selfish about it, Brian and Gary, and say, yeah, last year was a rotten year for us in terms of nearly every weekend I'd be on a plane going somewhere, and I'm treated very well. I get to sit on a nice seat on a plane and go to a lot of great places. It's not as glamorous as it sounds, as you will both know, but having been involved in motorsport, yeah, you know, we're going to Laguna Seca, yeah, we're going to Sebring or whatever, but you know, Miami and California and Japan and Bahrain and Dubai, they all sound brilliant until you get there and realize that actually all you're going to see is a hotel room and a racetrack. You know, you don't get time to perhaps really enjoy the wonderful locations that you go to. But yeah, we didn't do a lot of that last year, and it's at this point now trying to plan for 2021. And actually, you know, whatever your political feeling with regards to how here in the UK we've dealt with this horrible thing, as it stands now with regards to vaccinations, we are vastly ahead of some of my colleagues in Europe at the moment, but I still think travel probably until middle of the year might be difficult. So we've learned new ways of doing things. I mean, us three together on a Zoom call, it could only be bettered by some Technics 1200s and all of us playing records that we all love, you know? So this is great.
Yes, absolutely.
That's going to be a different show. That's going to be next week's episode, that one.
Okay.
So all them lovely locations, but we never mentioned Yarmouth or Skegness or Eastbourne or, so...
But do you know what? In their own way, they're just as attractive, Gary. And, one thing that I try and do, and this has been mentioned on the air to audiences, potential audiences of 16 million people. I try always not to forget my roots. I try always to have great respect for everything that has happened to me in the past and learn something from it. And I'll give you an example of that. A couple of years ago, Hockenheim, 70,000 people in the stadium. We're on the air to millions around the world. And there's a little lad next to me who's on the air with me, whose name is Ricky Collard. Now, how on earth did we manage, and we did manage to get Duffy Collard, who at that time had not long left us, and I'm still very sad about that. Yeah. We got him on the air and we managed to mention the fact that, when it came to sideways driving, there was no one better than Duffy, and Duffy did it on the ovals. And so you don't lose sight of it. I mean, Jamie Green, a top DTM driver. And whenever Jamie and I would talk, we'd always talk about Jamie's brother, who, of course, was a Briscoe Formula One world champion, I believe.
Yeah.
So, National Hot Rods for me is still something I absolutely love. Okay, we're not going to get into the whys and wherefores, but our paths go in different directions. Sometimes they're enforced, sometimes they're not enforced. But for my money, I still think some of the best drivers I've ever seen have graced the ovals, and they've been in 205s and Starlets and Corrados and all sorts of Mark II Escorts. Great things.
Yeah,
it's so good to hear that. The names from the oval racing sat alongside you at Hockenheim, and the name Collard. I mean, that's just phenomenal in itself. So you talk about your roots being in oval racing. Would it be cheeky to ask when you first became aware and involved in oval racing?
I can tell you exactly. One of the most bloody-minded, arrogant, full of himself people I know is my best friend, whom you won't know, and he won't know I'm talking about him because I'm not going to name him. But he took me along to a stock car meeting at Ipswich, and for those that don't know, I live within spitting distance of Vauxhall, and he took me along to a stock car meeting. I knew nothing about it, and I was a kid. I was at school, and I was absolutely spellbound by the theatre of this motor racing show. Because at that time you had people like Dave Smith, who's one of my best mates, flamboyant with the flags, a control car and a starter on the back of a control car. And actually, both of you will agree with me, the presentation standards of the National Hot Rod World Final over the years were something that big international motor series would be very proud of. I mean, it was done with aplomb, and I'm sure there are many really good reasons why it doesn't happen anymore. And I long lament the fact that Grand Parades had gone, because that's how we met our heroes and made our heroes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a shame. I think a lot of that stuff is probably down to time restraints, but
sure.
The show, you said it was, I mean, I got all excited you describing Dave Smith, and I hadn't forgot him because we never could, but that was, every time you turned up, I mean, we were all similar age. I think Brian's probably older than us, but but it was the excitement, isn't it? So you go there as a child, and I don't know about you, but I wanted to go back the following week,
yes.
And I wanted to know who. I had pictures of Barry Lee or George Polly on my wall. Like I was the only kid around me that actually had that, but it was getting big, wasn't it? In the 70s and 80s, it was breaking through a little bit.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm sure we'll go on to talk about them, but yeah. So I think I stayed with it for a long while and loved it as a kid. And it was actually Dave Smith was responsible for me getting involved on a semi-professional basis, if you will. And this is something that will appeal to both of you as well, because we'd gone to I'd gone to Wimbledon Stadium, and it wasn't Best in Britain. It was, I have a feeling it was some big charity night where lots and lots of stars, celebrities would come along to the event. There was no kind of celebrity racing. It was just I think it might have been a fundraiser for NABS or something like that.
Nordoff charity night.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And anyway, there, that particular, and I think it was probably still on a Saturday night at Wimbledon. And there was the Capital Radio Roadshow. Well, let me tell you, I've had a career in radio. And as far as I'm concerned, the biggest and best station ever was Capital 95.8. Not the crap we hear on radio today. I'm talking about in the days of Tarrant and John Sachs and Pat Sharp and Mick Brown, and as a radio guy, we aspired to be as good as someone like Capital, not necessarily Radio 1. It was Capital was the big station, and they had the Capital Radio Roadshow. Oh, geez, I've got to be there. It's racing, that hot rod racing, Capital Radio. With the exception of no, I'm not going to go down that route. it was pretty much everything I wanted. And I went there, and I have never been so disappointed. The Radio Roadshow was awful. And Dave Smith was in charge then, and Dave and I kind of knew each other, but we weren't friends by any means. And I was the cheekiest I've ever been. I went up to Dave Smith and I said, do you know what? That Radio Roadshow is a piece of crap in comparison to what could and should be done. You want to get our radio station involved, and we'll show you what can be done. And in typical Dave Smith fashion, he said, all right, Gobby, you think you can do a better job. You turn up at Ipswich at this meeting and you bring your thing along. And if you do a better job, I'll pay you. And if you don't, I won't.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And of course, we did do a good job, and he did pay me. And from there on in, I got very involved in the racing, which I had not been involved at all. So that's kind of how it started. So you can blame Dave Smith, really.
That's absolutely brilliant. You see, I didn't know that. And that eventually led on to you presenting On Track. And then you were very instrumental in getting National Hot Rods on our TV screens, weren't you?
That's not strictly true, Brian, because there was another guy that did that long before me. And it for whatever reason, and I don't know the reason, I got involved with that TV production company, and he was a good guy as far as I was concerned. And at that stage, I had nothing to do with putting the sport on TV. However, my career by then had changed a bit and was changing. I was running radio stations as well as still being on-air talent in the loosest possible terms. And I got a call from David Haird, whom I didn't really know terribly well at that point. And he said, look, we'd like you to be involved in this, and we're going to have Barry Lee presenting the program, and we want you to voice it, you see. And if I'm honest, I was a bit upset by that. And David said, well, what's the problem with that? I said, well, do you know what? I'd quite like to present it, and I think I could do that. I've spent my life in broadcast, nothing to do with me, boy. You speak to and Vic, I think his name was, the guy that was producing it at the time. And we went down to Wimbledon, and as a bit of a test, he said, okay, do me a walkthrough of a National Hot Rod to camera. And I've done a bit of telly, of course I had. Well, Barry did it first of all, flustered, effed and blind, and did everything that you would expect Barry to do. And yes, I worship him because he's the character that he is. He's brilliant. And of course, then I walked around this National Hot Rod as almost like a screen test, if you will. And Vic was like, oh, it's like Jeremy Paxman's doing this, except he doesn't have a belly, and it was perfect to point. And he said, I want it within 60 seconds. I did it at 59.98 recurring. Do you know what I mean? So it was then decided that actually we'll have Barry and Dave do the presentation and do the voice work as well. It'd be brilliant. And actually, in many regards, it was good fun. It was good fun. But then then that kind of fell out of bed for whatever reason. And then David Head got even more involved. And, you know, I can't tell you how distraught I am that David is no longer with us, because that man was such a visionary. He had such ambition, such aspiration, such high hopes for our sport, which I have to be honest with you guys, I still think is one of motorsport's best kept secrets.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
I really do. I can't speak for the last couple of years because I've not been there, but that's, you know.
Yeah, David was he was instrumental in me getting involved really with the PR side, and
Okay.
and yeah, I think I was just sort of dabbling a little bit with Neil's website, and I think social media just started. And he came up to me, I remember, at Birmingham, and said, "Right, I want you come and speak to Roy Eaton and Philip Bonds. I want you running NHRPA." And I'm like a fan, you know. And, it was like, and I went and he took me to a transporter, and in there was like Ricky Hunn, Colin White, John Stewart. There was all these people there, Malcolm Blackman in his early days, and he was sort of like putting me forward. And that's just the way he was, isn't he? You know, you couldn't really argue with David. It was like, you know, and I was out of my depth at the time, and it took me a little bit to get my confidence, but he backed me massively. And, you know, I sort of like remember them sad final days, really. And I spoke to him, and you know, I made him a promise that I would always do my absolute best in National Hot Rods, and I'm still trying to do that. And I always think of David all the time, you know, really, and the way, the amount of people, that how enthusiastic he was around the ovals, fantastic. And of course, Nick Thomas as well. Sorry to cut in there. You know, the same, you know, people that was so passionate about National Hot Rod racing.
Yeah, I mean, the passion across both of those gentlemen was the same, and you know, I think I'm part responsible for. I mean, Nick was like me. Nick was a fan of the sport, and I think I pushed him towards getting more involved. Where this was back in his days of Henley's, and incidentally, because I was on the air, I had a sponsored Henley's car, you know, with my name down the side, and you know, real bird puller that wasn't. But you're right, the passion that those two guys had, and you're also right that a skill and a talent that David Head had that I've never seen replicated with anybody else, perhaps with the exception of Gerhard Berger, actually.
You're such a name dropper, by the way. Just putting that in there.
Is David had a way of being able to get you to do anything. You just could not say no to him.
Definitely, yeah.
And I miss him terribly. And you know, it's really good that you mentioned both of them, because they were such a huge part of my life. And I mean, I have to say, the job I do, and I'm going cold now as I'm speaking to you, the hardest gigs I have ever had to do was I was asked to speak at David's funeral. There was myself and Malcolm Forbes, and I think we were the only two that spoke, because David had a huge network of friends, but he had what he called his three musketeers, which was myself, Malcolm Forbes, and Sonny Howard.
Yeah.
And I'll still remain forever, ever grateful to Leslie and to Chris, because in the final days of David, who in his final days had helped organise everything for Nick's funeral, because of course just a short while before that we'd lost Nick. Yeah. And God, talk about a hard gig. I actually had to host that funeral. I was asked by both his wives, not obviously they weren't the wives at the same time.
Thanks for clarifying.
Nick's having a laugh at us now for me making that faux pas. But yeah, I'd been asked to do this, and I said, do you know what? I just can't do this. I'm really sorry. That's one thing I just cannot do. And Jean, his first wife, got on the phone to my missus and said, tell that bloody Dave that he spends his life trapping about people, and if he wants to do it for the good of some people for once in his life, then he will do it. I was kind of forced into that, but I'm not too proud to admit I cried buckets at both, because it was so very hard. And it was at David's funeral, which really was a terribly sad occasion, but a celebration in another way as well. It's the first time I came across Tommy Maxwell, whom of course I'd known. There was this enormous gorilla out of church and gives me this massive hug, you know. And from there on in, Tommy and I have been great friends, because we both shared such admiration for David and for everything David did. And he, when you, to go back to the root of this really, which was in terms of trying to heighten or maintain or increase the profile of national hot rod racing, David did so much and he wanted so much, and he was such a selfless man. He didn't want to do it because he was an ex-racer and Chris was racing. He wanted to do it for the good of the sport. There was not a side to him that had any interest in betterment for himself or for his family. He wanted to do it for the sport, and I loved the man for it. And I'm very sad that we didn't. I mean, we had some wonderful ideas, which, had David still been around, we'd have done it, because he'd have broken down the walls that existed to prevent those things happening. I don't know how he would do it, but he would do it because he was that determined. And he was that determined when he was a very ill man. I have immense admiration for him.
Yeah, definitely.
Incredible. So would you say that it was David who was mainly responsible for getting National Hot Rod Racing onto Sky Sports? I remember there was a period of time when there were regular meetings being broadcast on Sky Sports.
Yeah. Yeah, David did, and through some connections of Barry as well, to be fair. Be fair, they got involved with a guy called Andrew Marriott, who was a real television impresario. And I remember going to the Goodwood Revival to meet Andrew and to have a discussion about getting National Hot Rods on TV again. So there'd been a pause, and there was a real groundswell where, led by David, of getting the sport back on TV. And this meeting was arranged at the Goodwood Revival, not the Festival of Speed. And it's the only occasion I've had the mispleasure of having to share a hotel room with Barry Lee. I don't do hotel sharing. I don't do room sharing with anybody. In fact, when I'm away, if Charlotte wants to come for the weekend, she has a different room. I just don't want to. And
Barry Lee, eh?
That was awful, Gary. Absolutely awful. Started feeling me up as well. But anyway, we met, and anyway, so the TV thing evolved, and David was hugely responsible for that, and he continued that, and I know, you know, we don't say any ill of anyone on this pod, on this Zoom, and I don't want to do that, but I will say, and I must say this, I think the sport could and should have gone further than it did. I think David really wanted that to happen, and I'll be really interested to get your guys' take on this. There seemed to be almost, you would turn a positive corner, but it was almost like there was a magnetic field trying to reel you in all the time. That perhaps there were things happening behind the scenes, and I'm not talking about the present incumbent. I really am not. No. Perhaps there were things going on that would just think, oh, hang on a minute, we don't want this getting away. We don't want this getting away from us. We don't want this happening. I don't know. I've got no evidence of that, but I know David was very frustrated at times that we kind of almost, he wasn't allowed to do what he would have liked to have done, and I think he would have done it.
I mean, there's always the age-old argument from a promoter's perspective that if people are sat watching it on telly, they're not going to come through the turnstiles, clearly, and that's always going to be an undercurrent, I imagine, that is going to make a promoter be a little bit more cautious about putting it somewhere where it's easily accessible to audiences.
Yeah, and the argument is, and it still stacks up, so, you know, the figures do still stack it up. Look at when Sky got involved with football. And what they did is through their involvement in football, you know, there was a lot of concern about, well, hang on a minute, this is going to knock our gates tremendously. Well, actually, the excitement that they created around the live product meant that, and it didn't happen immediately, to be fair. I think that generally, that from their involvement in football, actually live attendances grew because people got excited by what they were seeing and thinking, I want to be part of this. I want to actually be part of the festival, not necessarily part of the television. So, yeah, and you know, that is an argument, and I can understand that argument. There have been examples where it has gone the other way as well, but I think generally that the heightened brand awareness you get of something through its exposure on broadcast media is always going to be far greater than necessarily the sum of its parts. And you know, the casualty you might lose by it in terms of, you know, yeah, it might make a dent in the first few, but actually the overall net benefit will be greater than what it costs you. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah, I think I was always frustrated that I wanted to get racing to a bigger audience. But I'm still not, as I've sort of become a little bit wiser and older, I'm not sure whether that we sort of neglect the actual audience we've got already, and whether, you know, trying to be British touring cars light, we don't need to be. I think maybe the confidence of when we associate before with the touring cars, and again, a little bit wiser and older, that we are a niche that's really, really good, and it's got its own place anyway, you know. So I'm not sure. Yes. Obviously, you're very involved with circuit racing. How it, you know, the reputation of oval racing, is it still looked at by some as a second-class grassroots working man's thing, or is that just perceived?
That's very hard for me to answer, Gary, because unfortunately, whilst I'm involved in television on circuits, it tends to be internationally and not domestically. So, and there isn't so great an oval scene in other parts of the world, which is, you know, a great shame. But there is no doubt about it that the people you talk to in other racing, there are those that know a bit about it, who are hugely respective of and in admiration of it, and there are those that don't, and naturally assume that 30, 40, 50,000 pound car going around the track is a banger. Now, of course, we know different to that. Of course we do, but so to answer your question, I'm not sure. I think I had a lovely situation, and I'm not name dropping here, as Brian will suggest I am. I was in the hospitality somewhere in Europe, and I can't remember where it was. And it was for a big German brand one make series that was a support to DTM or something like that. And I sat there having a beer. It was the end of a Saturday night or something, having a meal. And a guy called Mark Jenkins came over to me. Mark, hugely successful engineer and coach and race team organizer, and his brother David races big trucks. David Jenkins, Jenks, you'll know him. And Mark Jenkins, good friends with Terry Grant. And Mark came bounding over to me with 2 pints, as Mark would, and said in a not particularly quiet manner, "That hot rod program that you made last week on the Hot Rod World Final was the best effing TV I've ever seen on hot rod racing."
Brilliant.
Great. And I think at the time, the head of VW Motorsport was Jost Capito, who, of course, is now at Williams as CEO. And he sat on the table next to me, and he looked at me and looked at, you know, what is hot rod racing? Do you know what I mean? I was thrilled, because it is, you know, in every facet of motor racing, and we it's nothing to do with me anymore, but those in oval racing perhaps hide behind a bushel which they shouldn't hide behind, because for those people that are in the know and that are aware of it, they're hugely respective of those people that are involved, because it's damned hard work. My parting shot before I left the oval scene, which is not a topic that we're going to talk about, was the BTCC thing that you talked about, Gary. Yeah. And I will hold my hands up and say that was a lot down to me. A sight more down to a guy called Matt James, who of course is just a huge fan. Yeah. But you know, you speak to any of those guys and they will tell you how hard it is to put a car around a quarter-mile track and do it well and do it successfully. You know, the athletes that drive oval cars, you know, they're bloody good racing drivers. And you know, we've seen countless examples of drivers that have come from the ovals and gone on to make it very, very big in international motorsport. There's a reason for that. They have a damn good grounding.
Yeah. As someone who's experienced most forms of motorsport, what do you think it is that makes something like hot rod racing so compelling? Because we tend to find that people keep coming back to hot rod racing, and it's kind of like a drug. What is it about short oval racing that is so compelling, in your opinion?
Go back to the start of our conversation. I think it's theatre, Brian. I think, to be truthful, the fact is that it's contained in a not necessarily nice, but it's in a stadium environment. You can see all of it all the time. It's a real concentrate of everything we love about motorsport. I spend my life on circuits which are 4s and 3s and 4 kilometers long. Wouldn't think about putting 30 cars on there sometimes, yet in oval racing you do it on a quarter-mile track, so inevitably it's going to be fraught, it's going to be action-packed, and it is, and that actually just still heightens further, doesn't it, the credit and respect you used to have for the drivers to be able to do that. I mean, Christ, I see worse dings on long circuits when somebody takes somebody out. Do you know what I mean? And then, these guys will do it on a quarter. I think it's the theatre of it. I think it's the drama. It is like a cauldron, isn't it? It's Les Eaton, I think, God rest him, I think he was always the master, wasn't he? And ringmaster, that's the word I was looking for, Yeah. It is. I've always been a firm believer. There are many people that do my job that are motor racing purists, and they are brilliant, and they have memory recall that I could only ever dream of. But they come from a racing purist background.
Yeah.
From my side, I come from a broadcast background, and I'm into the show. It's got to be a show, because if it's not entertaining, I ain't going to get an audience. It doesn't matter who it is on the grid, You can have great races with 8 cars. You can have great races with 30 cars. Conversely, you can have exactly the same, but those be bad races. It's all about the show. It's all about entertainment. I appreciate and I understand completely the skills involved and the investment that's made. But, ultimately, why do we love motorsports? Because we love being entertained.
So it's very much the gladiators in the Colosseum. It's that kind of image, isn't it?
To a degree, yeah.
Gary?
There was a brief time where you was actually racing yourself on track. Lightning rods, am I right? Did you go straight into lightning rods, and how did that come about?
Oh, Christ. You never said you were going to talk about this.
Well, everyone, we picked you up as a lightning rod superstar.
This is on the schedule. Yes, I did. I didn't have a race. I drove it badly.
Yeah. What a feeling.
And I'll tell you what it did do, Gary. What it did do is it made me respect and appreciate a little bit more just how bloody hard it is. Because we've all stood on the terraces thinking, oh, why haven't you gone past him? Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? Well, get out there and have a go if you think you're good enough. And I did get out there and have a go, and I was definitely not good enough. I did win a race. At one point, I was third in a points chart.
Wow.
I think it was for rookies, or that was just sheer luck.
Yeah.
How did it happen? I'd always kind of wanted to have a go. And then I got the opportunity with, because I was based at a radio station in Cambridge and running that, I got involved with, got quite friendly with Graham Boyd. I think, if memory serves me, he's in classic hot rods now, but I might be wrong. But anyway, long and short of it was, I did some work for him, and he said, look, rather than bung you a load of money, why don't I give you a racing car? Because we've got a couple of old bits laying in the shed. Fantastic, and of course everyone, dear Jim Gregory and people like that always build me as this, radio superstars coming racing. I was just rubbish. I was rubbish.
Cannot believe it. So you actually won a race. Which track was that at?
Bovingdon.
Oh.
I well remember I was leading the race, and same as what happened this weekend in Misano, except I wasn't driving a Ferrari 488 Challenge Evo, obviously.
That's the
in that you're winning a race, and I'd been advantaged by the fact that there was a load of people behind me and a load of crashing behind me. So of course I'd just been able to escape up the road. And typical, there was a yellow flag. Brilliant, it's about 5 laps left. Everyone's right up my trumpet now, including one Mr. Nick Farrer, another another superb guy who's no longer with us. And Mark Eaton came up to Mark Eaton, I think was race director. And he came up to me and he knew that I was not very good. And he put his head through the screen and he says, look, put your nose in the arse of that control car in the final turn, he said, and keep it there. He said, and you'll win the race.
Brilliant.
Having a laugh. I've got Nick Farrer behind me, Richard Bolton one side as well. You know, they're in a hope in hell. So anyway, off we go, restart, and Nick Farrer comes up on my outside, and I'm like, oh, Christmas, you know. I mean, Nick could be fiery, couldn't he? But I have to say, I got on so well with Nick, and he hung on my outside, and then he dropped back, and then he'd give me a little tap going into the corner. You know, the lap boards are out. There's 2 laps left. I'm still in the lead, but I've got Nick Farrer. I know he's just gonna fire me, isn't he, and come through. And crossed the line, took the checkered flag, and Nick Farrer came alongside me and just gave me a big thumbs up. And I remember saying, and I won that race. And I remember we went into the pits afterwards, and I said, Nick, you had so many chances to come through. He said, Dave, I wanted you to win that one. That's the only one I'll ever gift you.
Absolutely brilliant.
Well, I didn't really win it, did I? I was given it by the great Nick Farrer.
Well, it's good that you actually got to race. I mean, both you and Garry have both had experience racing. They say
Garry was better than me by a big margin.
My stories are horrific, but I remember racing the stock rod the first time at Ipswich, and I think I was starting off the back. So behind, I think it would have been possibly Andy Sturr, you know, world champion or whatever. And you go into bend 1 and you think, right, wherever he breaks, I'm going to do exactly the same. But when you're a novice, it doesn't work. And I literally did a 360 into turn 1, you know, sort of like, and ended up sort of like correcting myself, and the pack was on me and they're all through me. And, you know, but it's good fun to be out there. But we need to get Brian out on track as well at one time, and so he can.
I have to tell you that there was a time.
Stop that.
Can
I tell you what he did to my rental car?
Don't even go there.
He jacked. Genuinely, Garry. Has he not told you this story? We're on our way back from some track that I've just somehow charitably given him this job of doing some stuff for me. And I've said, right, as penance, you can drive a blooming rental car, because I hate that. I can then have a fag, and do you know what I mean? And not worry about it. Well, we've stopped at, I don't know where it is, Berlin Airport or wherever, to fill up with fuel. And I've got out to go and speak to somebody and have a fag. And I hear this, go-dunk. Sounds like that roller shutter door is open. I turn around. There's our rental car jacked up on this concrete post. There's no other cars around, Garry, and he's put this bloody thing up a post.
We had him as a steward for years, you know. Like.
I cannot believe. Do you know what? I've never told anybody that story.
Well, I have.
No, you haven't.
I'll get you back for asking about lightning rods, boy.
In my defense, it was this kind of bollard that was very low down and completely out of sight. And I thought, oh, I'll drive around and pick Dave up, because he hates walking. I thought I'll save him the walk. I'd deny that, if you will. And so I drove around, and this bollard that was about the height of about half of the height of a wheel, and I happened to catch the balance of the car on it and got wedged.
Bloody thing was up it. And the worst of it was that the guy, Garry, that I'd called in to see ran a race engineering business next door to this filling station, you see, and he just happened to be there. You know, he's a really influential guy. He runs a Carrera Cup and Super Cup team, you know, really get on really, really well with him. And he just came out and looked at what was left of this rental car. And
it wasn't that bad.
He said, well, that won't be running again, will it?
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. That's what I say.
we're definitely best talking about the racing rather than doing the race.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as racing goes, many years ago, I somehow got roped into painting the toilets at Ringwood Raceway during the summer. And everyone had gone home, and it was myself and Jerry Fisher, who was the track photographer. And we decided to take our road cars round the track. And funnily enough, I was in a borrowed car then as well. And I came out of the pit turn and got out on the marbles and got completely sideways and got a tank slapper on, and it snapped around. And I just avoided sticking it up a post. And that was the only time I've ever attempted to go around an oval at speed, and probably the last time as well. As they say, there are those of us who can race and those of us who talk about it.
Well, last year, we were one of the few events I managed to get to was Circuit de Catalunya, Barcelona. And I was doing a piece to camera explaining one of the turns along, with a driver coach and with the driver as well. And rather than walk, we'd all taken our rental cars, and we were having this little jolly on the way back. And I was driving this. Sixt will never rent to me ever again. I was driving this rental car, and I got it on the rumble strips at turn 14. No, I'm going to tip the bloody thing over. Thankfully, I didn't. So, do you know what? Take it back, Brian. It happens to all of us. But
yeah,
that
especially
was a
to me.
baptism of fire for you, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. That was our first GT Masters gig together, was it? And our last.
Absolutely. I've never been with you since.
You haven't? No. Brilliant. Do you know what? I had a whole list of things I wanted to ask you about, questions I wanted to ask. And unbelievably, we've been rabbiting on for well over half an hour. And
you got the killer ones in, didn't you? You got the killer ones in, didn't you?
Yeah, got the killers in. There were a few more. I didn't even mention your association with Mr. Blobby, but we'll let people guess on that one. Just before we finish, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you've got lined up for this year, just so that people know what you're up to.
As we speak, who knows? Truthfully, I'm very lucky that I have a really, really good relationship with Ferrari, and through all of this last year, a big thrill for me was the fact that having been involved in Ferrari's Corsa Clienti program, their Ferrari Challenge Series, whether it's Asia Pacific, North America, UK, or indeed in Europe. I've been with them for a number of years now, and I got the opportunity. Sorry, I didn't get the opportunity. I was asked if I would consider the being cast to be the voice of the Scuderia Formula One team, Ferrari's Formula One team, whether I'd be their voice on the Road to 1000 campaign. Of course, they celebrated 1000 Grand Prix at Mugello last year, where sadly they didn't perform as we would hope for them to perform, but I think this year may see an improvement. So that was a big thrill. I'm very much committed to Ferrari. There are some other things in the offing, and who knows? I mean, I'm very much liking. I have a studio complex here. I do an awful lot of TV program narration now. A lot of it is motor racing, but some of it isn't. And I guess as I'm getting older and want to rest the weary ones a little bit, but perhaps if I can find ways of not traveling quite so much, not that I don't enjoy it, because I do, but it can be a bit demanding when it's 7, 8, 9 weekends on the bounce that you're away. I like doing voiceover work here, and not always for motorsport. So I'm the voice of a Formula One program called GP Confidential. I've also got there's some new esports. We did a bit of esports earlier on. I was the voice of the Audi #RaceHome charity program last year, which Jamie Green was involved in, obviously as a then Audi DTM driver. And there's, funnily enough, the brand new World EX Championship, which launches, I think it's on Thursday this week, which is organised by a guy called Thomas Vogt and Mike Rockenfeller. And very, very pleasingly, they insisted that I voice that. So that's something to look forward to on Thursday. Some great names in that, including Romain Grosjean and Baitsky Visser, and just watch out for one Mr. B. Senna, I think, involved in the first round of that. So that will be good. And I think that, you know, there is a move towards, you know, esports has become much more prolific because of the pandemic. I think it deserved to become more prolific anyway. And of course, there's the whole topic of where we go from internal combustion engines. Are we going to go to esports? I think it's inevitable.
Yeah.
Personally, what the heck does that do for oval racing? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a big question, and it was something I wanted to delve into with you, but I think maybe we're going to need to get you back so that we can talk a bit more about that, because there are the questions of where is world motorsport heading? What is the impact on grassroots motorsport like National Hot Rod Racing? And that's probably the topic of another podcast, because we could probably go on all evening about that. Our time is up. We've seriously overrun.
Sorry.
Thank you. No, it's been an absolute joy. So as I said, I had a whole list of questions and things I wanted to ask, and didn't get anywhere near them. So thank you, Dave. It's been an absolute privilege to talk to you, and been a really good, well, most of it. There's certain bits of it I will get my revenge, but that's a dish best served cold. Gary, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think it's been fascinating. I knew you'd be a great guest, Dave. And
oh, that's kind.
We could talk for a lot more. And I hope that our audience which is growing every week, and we've been getting some really nice responses and comments from people. And I hope it just sticks to people talking passionately about what we love. You know, National Hot Rod Racing, oval racing, motorsport. It's really just good. It's just a nice way of doing it. Zoom has been great way of doing it and getting it out simply. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it.
Oh, I have, and thank you very much for graciously inviting me. I'm sure the growth trajectory that you're seeing will be completely buggered up by having me as the guest, but I have really enjoyed it. I mean, there's nothing better than talking about something we all love, is there? And so we'll see what the audience makes of it.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks, Gary. Thanks to everybody who's been watching. And just to pick up what Gary said, thank you to everyone who has been commenting. We've had quite a few messages, and we read everything. Your encouragement is much appreciated. If you've got people you want us to talk to, things you want us to talk about, then drop us a message or leave a comment on the Facebook or on the Instagram. Thank you for watching tonight. Thanks again, Dave. Thanks, Gary. And we look forward to chatting to somebody else again very soon. So we'll see you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.